let's talk about normal lessons versus the part 3. Now, if you are leading up to your part 3, the chances are you now have a few weeks or possibly even a few months experience of teaching, whether that's on a pink badge, whether that's with your trainer, whether that's teaching yourself and self-reflecting, whether that's with family members or teaching for free. It doesn't really matter how you're getting that experience, but I'm pretty sure that if you're watching this video, you've already gained that experience and you're leading up to your part 3. And what you'll probably hear, because you're probably reading lots of things, you're probably listening to lots of people, you'll probably hear people say, do a normal lesson. Your part 3 is just a normal lesson. You may even hear examiners say, do a normal lesson. Now, I'm going to dismiss that, or rather, I'm going to ask you to reframe your thoughts about that. And we talk about this in the workbook as well as obviously this video, and I'll give you some reasons for why I want you to think about it slightly differently. Now, your normal lessons are probably an hour and a half or 2 hours long, sometimes a little bit longer, sometimes a little bit less, but probably not 45 minutes long. I suggest within the hour, 2 hours that you're doing with a pupil that you structure your lesson very differently to how it potentially is going to be structured for your part 3. So for example, you might have a drive to site where you and your pupil might be a little bit off duty, if you like, and you haven't necessarily started the bulk of the lesson. It may well be that you're driving your pupil somewhere. It may well be that you are choosing the area that you mix and match different skills and techniques throughout a 2-hour period with, and within a 2-hour lesson you are doing numerous things, none of which you might particularly master in terms of the pupil's ability to do, but you're giving a little bit of this and a little bit of that. This is very different from a part 3. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean. On a part 3, you're going to start and finish at the test centre. You don't normally do that on a normal lesson. On a part 3, it's 45 minutes long, and you don't normally have 45-minute long lessons. On a part 3, you're going to have an examiner sitting in the back of the car, and unless you're having a trainer sitting in the back of the car quite regularly, your normal lessons do not have somebody sitting in the back of the car judging you with the ability to give you a badge or not that is going to allow you to continue with your career. So there are some fundamental differences with the part 3, not just in the structure, which we'll look at in a moment, but also in the psychology and what's going on behind the seat, if you like, for both you and your pupil. Now, when you've been giving your normal lessons, when you have been getting experience, however you're getting that experience, the chances are you have fallen into comfort zones, if you like. You've fallen into a style that works for you and a style that works for your pupils. And one of the most, I guess, common things that drive instructors with that little bit of experience fall into is perhaps recognising a fault, not necessarily dealing with it, but clocking it. Now, I'll give you an example of what I mean. I live quite a considerable distance away from my local test centre, and so we have probably about 35-40 minutes drive to get into our town before we have anything remotely resembling what it is our pupils are going to do when they do the town driving, or of course on their test. So if I'm picking up a pupil from their school, from their college, or from home, or from somewhere in my little village, and driving, or they're driving to the town, the chances are we are 40 minutes into the lesson before we're looking at a specific subject we've gone into town to specifically do. So let's imagine here I am picking up my pupil from our little village, and when my pupil pulls away from the side of the road, they don't do a blind spot check. Now, wouldn't be necessarily uncommon for them to miss a blind spot check. Am I stopping the lesson? Am I pulling them up again? Am I questioning them about blind spots? Am I then making that part of that lesson? No, not necessarily. I am doing a blind spot check. I know it's safe for them to pull up, and I clock it. I clock that and I put it into my brain, and I think, right, at some point I'm going to be talking about blind spots. My pupils are not going to their tests 40 hours later, or however long it is that I'm teaching them, not doing blind spot checks. It just so happens that was either missed, or it might be something that I haven't necessarily covered in good detail enough for them to learn at that point yet. If I stopped a pupil and revisited what they were doing and got them to learn from every single fault that they ever made, I wouldn't get out of my village, let alone get into the town to practice the skill or the subject that I'm wanting to practice. But as I said, it doesn't mean that they're not going to. It just means that now is not the time to do it. If I was on a part 3 and my pupil didn't check a blind spot, would I pick them up on it? Would learning take place? Would I have to incorporate that into the lesson? Yes. And that's the difference. So of course, if you are gaining experience, and over that experience of teaching the pupils that you're teaching at the moment, you've fallen into that comfortness of becoming familiar with what a fault is in terms of prioritizing it within the overall scheme of the learning journey, not today's lesson, but the overall scheme of the learning journey, the chances are you've settled into that, and that's what's then familiar with you. So the reason why you now have to completely rethink the structure of the part 3 is because that's exactly what it is. It's a rethink. In other words, your brain needs to be doing something slightly different to what it would be doing on a normal lesson. So when the pupil commits a fault, there has to be an acknowledgement that both you and your pupil recognise a learning opportunity has come up. You're either going to sort that out with 2 or 3 questions, or you're going to change the focus of what you're doing to just incorporate that. But you're certainly not going to dismiss faults and let them go. And that's where the structure of a part 3 and a normal lesson is very different. So I would strongly suggest that you have a think about that. You need to obviously know what the criteria is for the part 3. You need to know exactly what they're looking for, and the workbooks and the videos. And of course, if you're using a trainer, will help you to kind of come up to that level, if you like, to get an understanding and acknowledgement about how different normal lessons are. And there is, of course, a nice chunk in the workbook where we do talk about how your normal lessons are not wasted. It's not a case of you getting into bad habits. Don't think about it like that. There are lots of very, very useful things that your normal lessons are going to be teaching you that you, of course, are going to incorporate into a part 3. But in your head, you need to have that very firm understanding of what the differences are and what you're going to bring from your normal lessons into a part 3 structure. Now, when people do say, do a normal lesson, I think that probably what they're meaning is be a normal you. So in other words, you're not going to try and be somebody different. You're not going to try something different. You're not going to fake yourself, if you like. You're not going to be anything different in terms of your character. So how you might structure the lesson might be different. The things that you're going to pick up on, and maybe the tools and techniques you use, will be very deliberate for that particular moment. But in terms of you, you have to be the real you. You can't not be a normal you. And I think that that's how I'd like you to think about when people say, do a normal lesson, or your part 3 is a normal lesson. It's not. It needs to be a normal you.